Hey guys, how's it going? Eli here, back with another video where today we're going to be answering the age-old question, which is better to invest in long-term, elite trainer boxes or booster boxes, as well as looking at it in the short term. Without further ado, let's just jump right into it. As always, get out of the way, we do weekly giveaways. All you have to do to enter is be subscribed, leave a like, and comment down below on any of the pre-recorded videos we post each and every week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can comment and like on each of those videos, so that's multiple entries. And then we've got 3 winners each and every week, so that's multiple opportunities to win. On top of this as well, if you aren't already aware, we recently just opened up an official LGS. And so if you're interested in, of course, supporting that, check out our shop, e4cards.com, to buy any assortment of Pokemon card singles. And then if you are interested in buying sealed product, and of course our specialty mystery packs for the YouTube, please check out PokemartUSA.com, where you can buy our official Pokemart USA mystery packs, which are launching in a couple of days. We have increased the pack odds as well. No longer will the golds be 1 in 25. The golds are now 1 in 16, as well as the silvers being now 1 in 8 instead of 1 in 10. And as mentioned before, we make sure to weigh the packs in your favor so you have a chance of getting a heavy more likely than getting a light. Lastly, if you don't already know, or if you're not a part of it, I highly recommend you join the Discord, as we constantly have deals available for you guys to take in part of. Links everywhere from our channel to other people's channels. And we just really want to create a community that's going to allow everyone to get the best deals out there in terms of being able to buy Pokemon product to invest in or collect. But now jumping into, of course, the video. Now, I'm hoping to make this video a little bit shorter. I know it probably won't be, but the reason why I say that is because I actually spent the past 40 minutes recording the video. Come to find out, I had my microphone turned off. So we're going to try and make this a little bit faster than before. But so we're going to be looking at 3 main things today. We're going to be breaking down booster boxes, comparing that to elite trainer boxes, and then comparing that to specialty elite trainer boxes as well. And we're going to, of course, take into consideration a lot of things when looking at which is the best to invest in long term and which is to invest in short term. One thing I want to also make clear as well that we're going to take into consideration when it comes to this thing, and we might as well just talk about this now. Regardless of the numbers that we're going to throw at you guys today, you have to understand too that for some people, you know, when it comes to storing a elite trainer box versus a booster box case, you can store roughly around 3 to 4 booster box cases compared to 1 elite trainer box case. So if you are someone, of course, that is limited on storage, then I personally would recommend that booster boxes are probably the best approach for you in terms of where you're just going to store a lot of this, of course, in the overall long term. Not to mention, of course, as we will discuss as well in the short term. But first thing I kind of want to start it off with is I wanted to take a look at Evolving Skies booster boxes compared to elite trainer boxes. So we're going to break it down from current Sword and Shield era, then Sun and Moon, then X and Y. So first things first, just taking a look at the general comparison, and we're going to try and go between just general MSRP and wholesale expected prices. So if you were to somehow be able to get it for wholesale, most products not, but for the most part, we're going to just say MSRP, right? So with that, when it comes to the overall booster box price, $100 cheapest price point, $250 is the high. So you're talking about roughly around a 150% return, or 2.5x times return. Taking a look at, of course, the elite trainer box for it, if you're saying to yourself $40 is the cheapest you're able to buy it, of course, some places, you know, 35, 38, very unlikely. And then, of course, 60 being the high. If we're not talking pre-sale, then you're not even getting a 2x return. So historically speaking, when taking a look at this specific example, we can see that Evolving Skies is a booster box that has actually performed extremely strong compared to its elite trainer box counterpart. Now, here is where things start to get a little bit interesting. When taking at Vivid Voltage, for example, Vivid Voltage was at one point the highest or best performing booster box compared to Evolving Skies, but Evolving Skies has since then surpassed that. With it reaching at its highest point, I saw sales upwards of $240 for the Vivid Voltage booster box. I know it's kind of hard to see because my face is a little bit bigger, so I will slowly I will make my face a little bit smaller for this instance, but as you can see right here, roughly $235, but $240 is what I saw at highest listed. Whether it's sold or not, who knows? Of course, with that, it did have a reprint, go down to $104, but we're not necessarily addressing the greatest, we're not necessarily addressing the low swings. We're more trying to look at the high swing comparisons, because obviously, we'll talk about low swings in terms of short term, but right now, when just talking about the overall long-term perspective, we're looking at, okay, how was the overall performance most recently, and what could we expect for it to potentially reach to in the future if hypothetically it were to get printed in the ground, right? Vivid Voltage being a perfect example of that. Of course, we know what the capability of that is. If you were to pick up the booster box, which at the time you could pick it up for roughly $82, and you're saying $240 is what you hypothetically sold it for, right? We're not going to calculate shipping fees and all this, but almost a 3 times return, right? With the overall Vivid Voltage Elite Trainer box, you can see right here that the overall high was roughly around, it's going to say $85 here, but we should see, yep, closer to that $100 price point. So if you're saying about a 3x return for 2.92, and you're saying versus Vivid Voltage, $100 divided by, of course, $40, then once again you're going to say Vivid Voltage is going to slightly be outpaced in terms of its booster box performance versus Elite Trainer box. However, one thing you have to take into consideration, I just did this based off of MSRP compared to based off of market value. So because there was an opportunity to buy it at $82, and there was a market value opportunity in terms of being able to pick up Elite Trainer boxes for this item. So if we go and we take a look and see, okay, let's say we picked it up at market value, which at the time was roughly around $32. So now we do a little bit of a different way in dividing it. It is now a slightly better performance. We can do this for actually multiple other different sets. So Darkness Ablaze is another perfect example of this. Darkness Ablaze hit roughly around 170 at its high point, or looks like 180-ish, slightly off. You guys can do the math for yourself. It's about a 2x return if we're talking about comparing it to what market price was at the time, roughly around $82. And then taking a look at, however, the Elite Trainer box performed at the 135 to 140-ish price point, that is going to drastically be an outperforming metric. So if you're saying you had a 2x return with the booster box to Elite Trainer box buying it at wholesale, and let's say $32 is the wholesale, just for the sake of the argument for the ETB, we can do that comparison, or not wholesale, but what the market value is, of course, at the time. If we're talking wholesale, it'd be roughly around $25. So we'll actually do that, divide this by 25, and what do you know, you're getting about a 5.6x return. All of this to say, what you have to be able to take in consideration when looking at currently the Sword and Shield era of things, when it comes to Elite Trainer box versus booster box performance, the Elite Trainer boxes that you've been able to get around the same wholesale comparison price, they have historically performed better from what we're seeing currently. Of course, Sword and Shield era is the newest set, and we're kind of in newer grounds and territory in terms of looking at the analytics of this, because Elite Trainer boxes over time are continuously evolving in terms of indicators in which we can kind of determine what's a better investment or not, but we'll look at that at a later part of the video. But the whole point that I want you guys to really take away from this is when looking at this, for example, of course, booster boxes like Vivid Voltage, you're able to pick up for 82. Darkness Ablaze, you were able to pick up at 82. With those same opportunities, the Elite Trainer boxes, of course, being closer to wholesale, they perform better. Now, don't get me wrong, this, of course, is factored in with the fact that back in when these sets came out, it was during the COVID pandemic at its point of, supply chain issues being at max volume. And so in terms of that, you have to be able to understand that supply chains were playing a major factor in this. But when comparing the two together and taking those factors into account, you still have to understand that, ETBs still outperformed drastically the booster box prices. Now, Vivid Voltage, of course, comparing it to Evolving Skies is a little bit of a different situation. Now, there's arguments to be made Vivid Voltage could be underpriced, overpriced, based off of whether supply chains played a factor in demand. However, when looking at Evolving Skies, I feel like you can make an actually similar argument. I know people don't like to admit that because, don't get me wrong, Evolving Skies, amazing set, super high demand set. It's going to do really well. But when you think about the overall reprints Evolving Skies has had, it's had one reprint and it's been absolutely small. Evolving Skies had its first lead up to when the set was released. It went to $200. And then when Wave 1 came out, the price didn't move. When Wave 2 came out, price crashed down to $100. So the only reprint we've had has been an absolutely tiny reprint wave. And for myself, typical reprint booster box waves, I get around 45 in allocation. For the reprint wave, I got 8. So that's about, a fifth and a half of what I would usually get in terms of allocation. So 20%-ish. So you really have to be able to take that with a grain of salt when saying to yourself, okay, Evolving Skies, it's high demand, very similar to Vivid Voltage. And it's quite interesting to see Evolving Skies is actually almost identically performing how Vivid Voltage did back when it was having, of course, low supply issues because of supply chain. So you got to ask yourself, is that something that could potentially happen almost identical to what happened with Vivid Voltage? I think that's entirely possible. But now looking at what's different, Elite Trainer boxes. What's going on different with Elite Trainer boxes? Well, with supply chain issues, of course, being super relevant during the time, booster boxes were more important to be reprinted, which they weren't really even being reprinted to begin with. But of course, Elite Trainer boxes were being already in short supply at that time. And then when things started to get better during the time of, end of 2021, around August, that's when you started to see a little bit more supply in terms of Elite Trainer boxes, especially going into 2022. We've already seen reprints for both all the Elite Trainer boxes that we mentioned. And with that being said, Evolving Skies ETBs haven't had the opportunity to perform anywhere near as good as their Elite Trainer box counterparts when trying to compare with Darkness Ablaze and Vivid Voltage. I think this is, of course, a factoring because with the overall change and shift in the market in terms of what the overall floor was during the time of the pandemic versus when it first started. Because when, of course, Vivid Voltage first came out, like I said before, you were able to get it at around wholesale prices. It wasn't until the middle of the pandemic when prices started to go out of control, and then people were asking the question, can you go below $100 on a booster box? Evolving Skies was one of those booster boxes where we were asked that question, so times were a little bit different with that. So you have to, of course, be able to take all these things into consideration and into account, but that's just one of the things I feel like it's really important to be able to take a look at. Another great example of this, and this is where we're going to finish up with the Sword and Shield era, is we're going to be taking a look at Brilliant Stars. So Brilliant Stars is another one that I think is a really good comparison when looking at the ETB versus the Booster Box. Booster Box, of course, has performed extremely well, pushing at around that $170 price point, both on its official release date as well as its current price point. Then going back and looking at, of course, the Elite Trainer box for it, the Elite Trainer box has not performed well. Why has it not performed well? Sure, you can say that, when you're looking at its pre-sale prices were really good, but when you look at its actual release, it's performed pretty poorly. Well, it's actually been a Elite Trainer box that has had multiple reprints already. It had its initial wave, and then it just recently had a reprint around the same time as the Elite Trainer box for Evolving Skies. So having that being said, it's almost a question of, did the Pokemon Company do that because they're trying to print Elite Trainer boxes more, or is it just a coincidence and they were just trying to print all of the Elite Trainer boxes at around the same time? I would say that I have to go with the latter on that, and that's what history is going to show us as we deep dive into this later. Historically, what the Pokemon Company has done, as I showed in last week's video, which is why I think this is relevant, or sorry, not last week's video, Monday's video, the Pokemon Company likes to do reprints all around the same time, and they like to reprint everything all around the same time. Talk about Elite Trainer boxes. When did we get our most recent Elite Trainer box reprint? It was about a month ago. And then leading into the summer is when we got the ones previous to that. Booster box reprints, haven't really seen them happen. So it's been very much so a cluster of Elite Trainer boxes, all kind of happen within a 4 to 5 month period span versus booster box reprints. Other than that kind of small Evolving Skies reprint, you haven't really seen anything major in terms of big reprints for a lot of the sets. So I would like to say that for those people that are saying, oh, Elite Trainer box waves have all of a sudden changed, no, Pokemon Company is just doing what the Pokemon Company does best. They like to reprint everything all at once so that there can be an equilibrium and a balance in terms of the overall pricing. Because, of course, if they only print one item at a time, then, of course, people are going to focus their wallets on buying that one item once the price drops, and then it's going to quickly be eaten up. Versus if you hold off and print everything all at once, people then have to pick and choose with their wallets on which items they prefer to buy during that time, which then hopefully balances out the prices. Not to mention, of course, with that, historically speaking, booster boxes, and this is, of course, just per the Pokemon Company, booster boxes tend to be reprinted more often just due to the fact of the matter that they care about competitive play more. And since there's 36 packs in a booster box versus 8 in a standard ETB versus 10 in a specialty, they would prefer to push out more packs because more packs means more cards to be opened. And of course, with cards, that plays into the price of competitive viability for more people to be able to be in the overall standard format without having to spend a ton of money because of the scarcity with competitive playable cards. So that's why I would make that general argument. Of course, you can always agree, disagree with me, and I would love to hear what you guys think about that in the comment section down below. Moving into, of course, the next era, we're going to be taking a look at the Sun and Moon era. So we're going to look at 3 different examples. First being, of course, Team Up. So Team Up is the set that, for those of you guys that don't know, is the most expensive booster box in the era. Question is, why? Supply chain, of course, was not something that was a factor during the Sun and Moon era, technically speaking. Only really for Cosmic Eclipse, I would say, is where you started to see real supply chain issues, and that was ultimately just due to the fact of the matter that they had a print run that was cut short. But for Team Up, this was a set that actually had a very, very low print. So when making that comparison for the $900 Team Up booster box compared to, of course, the $320 Elite Trainer box, it's very interesting to see how you can make that comparison when, once again, going back to, of course, the MSRP, 320 divided by 40 versus, of course, that's an 8x return, 900 versus 144. You're going to get, of course, the ETB to be outperforming once again. However, I'm not going to show this right now because we're short on time, but in terms of what I was able to pull up on the way back machine, we were able to find evidence that $88 actually was the market price at the time for Team Up booster boxes. 900 divided by 88, what are you looking at? Roughly around a $10, or sorry, not a $10, a 10x return, right? So pretty good return. If we're gonna say, let's make the argument that we've been making in terms of Elite Trainer boxes, let's say that $88 for that, we'll say that roughly around 32 is what's gonna be for the ETB. Then we're gonna say 320 divided by 32, what do you know, comes out to roughly around 10.2 for the booster box and 10 for just the ETB. So they're around similar. So there is an argument to be made, of course, once again, when it comes to scarcity for booster boxes, then that's when booster boxes tend to outperform Elite Trainer boxes. And we've seen that historically too, when you're looking at the overall pricing in terms of the charts for the Elite Trainer boxes versus the booster boxes. We look at the chart of the ETB, and it's very slow and steady progression growth versus the booster box. It's an item that goes up super quick in price, like doubles or triples, depending upon what price you got in for, and then it crashes down back to wholesale or slightly above wholesale or at MSRP, right? And that's because the reprints come consistently with booster boxes because they're more favorited. So when you look at sets like, for example, of course, Team Up, which had a very low print run for their booster boxes, you tend to see that booster boxes tend to perform very similarly. So that's something I feel like that's important to take into consideration. Of course, then moving on to Cosmic Eclipse, like I said before, was supposed to also have a reprint. Instead, it got cut short. The, of course, highest price for this booster box is, we'll say, roughly around $500. We'll make the same exact argument, say roughly around the $88 price point with Team Up, 5.6, right? Go and take a look at, of course, Cosmic Eclipse. What is the price point for that? Around 330 bucks. We're going to do the math, 330, divide that by 32. Well, ETB outperformed it. So that's something where, unlike the outlier, of course, of Team Up having a small supply, and with Cosmic having, of course, you know, a reprint that was canceled, it still hasn't performed as well as Team Up has, because even though the, of course, reprint was canceled, it still had a greater supply than of Team Up at the time. So what ultimately I'm trying to point out with this is that supply is one of the greatest factors during the time of whether or not it is a good investment or not long term, or if you're going to expect there to be more or less of a price stability, right? Rebel Clash is a perfect example. Terrible set. Why would you ever think Rebel Clash would do good? It's a competitive set. However, it has performed extremely strong, and that's because it had one print. It was a small print, and that print came out roughly around the same time of when COVID happened. Because of that, it has been a set that has performed extremely strong. However, with that being said, if it were to get a reprint, it would crash, probably wouldn't perform well. Team Up, Cosmic, both really high demand sets, really enjoyed sets as it currently stands as well. Of course, if they were to get reprints, we know historically speaking, they would do well, but since they were already in short supply, if we were to have hypothetically reprint, which we wouldn't because they're not in standard rotation, then you could see the prices on those absolutely plummet because of the scarcity of it, and you're drastically changing the amount of supply. But of course, if it's a set that's already oversaturated and there's already an absolute ton of it in circulating supply, then a reprint isn't going to do much in terms of a drastic movement, because if you have, hypothetically speaking, 100 oranges and then you increase that to 200 oranges versus you have 10 oranges and you increase that to 100 oranges, sure, you might be doubling it, and that's going to be 100 more oranges versus it's only, of course, 90 more, but the difference in your overall original supply is, it's 10 times more. So you have to be able to look at it in that regard. Hopefully that was a good example. Now, one thing we haven't discussed yet, but we're going to take a look at, and that is going to be specialty ETBs. One thing that I do find quite interesting, now that we've, of course, addressed the comparisons between booster boxes versus ETBs, we're going to address the comparisons between ETBs versus specialty. So specialty ETB, Dragon Majesty, this has sold at its highest point, roughly around $450. It's selling roughly between $350 to $400 on TCG Player. Of course, when we looked at Team Up and Cosmic, those are the two other most expensive ETBs in the Sun and Moon era. This is the most expensive ETB. Question is, of course, why? Historically speaking, ETBs in just, specialty generations have just performed extremely strong. Of course, you have to be able to look at this, of course, in a lens, and we will talk about that a little bit later, but specifically when talking about the Sun and Moon era, Dragon Majesty has performed extremely strong, as well as also when you look at the generation for Sun and Moon with the first half of eras, without pulling it up, talking about Shining Legends, that was also an Elite Trainer box that performed extremely strong compared to its counterparts when you look at all of the first generation of GX eras, right? So when you talk about base set, when you talk about Burning Shadows, when you talk about Guardians Rising, all of them, they have, of course, performed not even close. I would say maybe Celestial Storm has been the closest performing, but outside of that, none of the standard GX sets have come even close. To, of course, Dragon Majesty, let alone Shining Legends. So that's just a very unique perspective to take a look at. Now, here is where it gets extremely interesting, right? So when we talk about generations, right, and we look at generations, the Elite Trainer box as a whole, we have to be able to understand this when making that comparison. So during the time of the XY era, Elite Trainer boxes were few and far between. They weren't kind of like they are today, right? They first got introduced in the Plasma era in black and white, and then, of course, now are becoming more popular as they continue to be collected more. So with that, of course, being said, when you look at the first specialty ETB generations, you have to say yourself, how did it perform compared to everything around the time of it, right? So if you say to yourself $600, that's a pretty strong performing Elite Trainer box. When you look at, of course, a lot of the early era, first half era of XY, of course, it didn't perform well at all, right? Phantom Forces, Ancient Origins, Roaring Skies, a lot of these, first half to like middle of the road XY era, it just didn't perform as well. So the question, of course, with that being said is generations during that time the best investment compared to the other ones? Well, this is where it's very interesting to make this argument, right? Because Generations was the first set of its time to be a specialty ETB, and with that, it was one of the first sets to have an Elite Trainer box and be its only predominant way to be able to access the product rather than booster boxes. And because of that, the Elite Trainer box was printed much more heavily in comparison, which you might say to yourself, aha, well, so then doesn't that mean that specialty ETBs will not perform nearly as well because they're going to get printed as much? And the answer to that, I would say, is no, because when it came to ETBs back during that time, they were extremely, extremely scarce. They were few and far between. And so when they created a set that only focused on the ETB, it performed extremely well, all things considered. Yes, it wasn't printed to the same volume that it would for a specialty ETB in the Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield era, but we're talking about at the time. And so that's why I think it's really important to take that into consideration. Not to mention too, if we go and take a look, of course, for the XY era, and we look at the sets that were to come after it, Evolutions, Steam Siege, Fates Collide, of course, the generation slightly before that, Breakpoint, Breakthrough, and then I would say right before Ancient Origins. So all the sets that were around that time all underperformed it. So like I mentioned many times before, it was the early era of Elite Trainer boxes that were extremely, extremely scarce, where it was, of course, being outperformed by, but everything slightly before and slightly after that, when they were going into the back half of X and Y, it outperformed, which I think is something that you can have a lot of confidence in when looking at in the future of course, making those comparisons to specialty ETBs. Now that we've of course talked about the XY era, Sword and Shield era, Sun and Moon era, and we've made all these comparisons, what is the point that of course I'm trying to make with this video when comparing all three? Well, I would say it's really just a video that's indicative of the conversation or debate that we've been having forever. Talked about this before many a times, but I wanted to do something that was a little bit more in depth with this and really break down the numbers for you guys. And here's what I'm going to of course say in my personal opinion. I would say, based on what we've seen today in terms of the charts and just the overall history of Pokemon ETBs versus booster boxes, if you're looking for more of a short-term pickup, of course, since booster boxes are more volatile, as we've seen in the charts, it typically is going to outperform Elite Trainer boxes. But it's when the reprints happen, which are more than likely to happen with booster boxes versus ETBs, is when you start to see that price change, because ETBs tend to be a slow and steady progression unless they are, of course, very scarce. When booster boxes, like with the example Team Up, of course, are extremely scarce out the gate, then that's when you start to see the scalability be very similar to Elite Trainer boxes. So right now, take this into consideration. Scarcity is key. If a set like Rebel Clash can do well and hit $220 and be one of the, if not the, arguably worst set in the Sword and Shield era, then just about anything can do well as long as it is scarce. Of course, couple that with demand, like Team Up has, like Cosmic Eclipse has, then you can also see a high performing set. So if we're going into the future and asking ourselves, Eli, what does this more or less mean in terms of correlating to what's kind of the best pickups right now? As I've mentioned many times before, I think you can make very comparable, picks in terms of what to invest in from history to now. Like I've mentioned many times before, Pokemon Go I think is extremely comparable to Shining Legends. I think also as well that Hidden Fates is another one that you can compare very much to Shining Fates, and so on and so forth. Now, it really just comes down to, in my personal opinion, who you are as a collector, who you are as an investor, what strategy works best for you. You're someone that's more short-term, then obviously, if you can try and play volatility waves for sets that, let's say, for example, like with Evolving Skies, that haven't gotten those high prints that we're expecting you to get, just like how Evolutions was at first, where it didn't have high print and then it was, of course, printed into the ground and the price stayed at wholesale for the longest time. You can play those waves, right? We're trying to take speculative opportunities at this point, and if we're wrong, well, guess what? Booster boxes still will perform really well long term. However, historically speaking, based on what we're seeing, Elite Trainer boxes and specialty Elite Trainer boxes are definitely the way to go if you're a long-term investor. But like I said, referring to the very beginning of the video, you also have to take into consideration, are you someone that has the storage to be able to do this? And if you're saying price per square foot in terms of how much you're spending, whether you're keeping it in a storage unit or whether you're keeping it at home in your garage or in a well-ventilated area, that's something you also have to take into consideration on which you would prefer in terms of your overall investment strategy. Because if you're saying to yourself that you're paying more per square foot or per cubic foot in space and it's costing you than for how much you're yielding on the long term versus the short term, then that's also something you have to be very much so taking into consideration. So, but I would love to hear your guys' opinions, questions, concerns that you have about this topic, but I thought I would do a little bit of a deep dive conversation about this because I think this is something that it's very important to still have conversations about as the Pokemon, company, and as just Pokemon as a game and a hobby as a whole continues to evolve, and we monitor how reprints are affecting the future of Pokemon. But as far as it goes for today's video, as always, if you want to enter into our weekly giveaways, all you have to do is leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We post pre-recorded content for you to do so each and every week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Of course, as always, since you can comment and like on each video, that's multiple entries. And then we've got 3 winners each and every week, so multiple opportunities to win. Of course, if you don't already know as well, we recently opened our own official LGS. Of course, the name of that is e4cards.com if you want to go check out any of our selection of singles. However, for the YouTube, if that's something you want to support and of course buy some of our specialty products, you can do so at PokemartUSA.com. Link is also down in the description below for that. We are officially going to have in the next couple of days our Pokemart USA mystery packs get released with new and improved odds, gold 1 in 16 and then silver 1 in 8 to be pulled. And as mentioned many times before, we're going to make sure we weigh the packs in your guys' favor. With that, of course, Power Keepers being one of the heavies that you can pull. Lastly, with all this being said, if you haven't already, I highly recommend you join the Discord. With the recent addition to the deals channel, we've had a lot of opportunities for people to find product at really good discounted rates. So if you are someone that likes to collect or invest, highly recommend you join and do so. Or if you're someone that's just a huge fan of Pokemon, I highly recommend you join to be a part of our already growing Pokemart USA community. But as far as it goes, that is all for today's video. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Until then, I will see you all on Friday. Peace.